Have you ever heard of an ordinary man who saw his life completely change in just a few days, simply because he decided to make room for God in his house? That man was Obed-Edom. The Bible tells us that, in a time of great fear in Israel, many did not want to come near the Ark of the Covenant because it represented the presence of the Lord, and any carelessness could be fatal. Then the Ark was taken to the house of Obed-Edom. For anyone, this could seem like a great risk, but he accepted the responsibility of caring for the most sacred object of Israel. And the unexpected happened. In a short time, his family was blessed, his house prospered, and his story gained eternal prominence. But after all, who was Obed-Edom? Why was he the one chosen for such a serious mission? And how did his attitude of faithfulness not only bring immediate blessings, but also leave a legacy of service to God for future generations? That is what we will explore in this video. Stay until the end to learn the impressive story of Obed-Edom and the Ark of the Covenant in his house, a powerful example of how the presence of God can change destinies and turn ordinary situations into testimonies of victory. The Ark of the Covenant was the most sacred symbol for Israel. It was built by the command of God himself in the days of Moses, during the journey of the people through the wilderness. Made of acacia wood and covered with pure gold inside and out, it had a cover called the mercy seat. On it were two sculpted golden cherubim, and between them God manifested himself in a special way. Exodus chapter 25, verses 10 and 22. Inside the Ark of the Covenant, there were three very important objects, which reminded the people of Israel of God's covenant with them. The tablets of the law, given to Moses on Mount Sinai, a jar with the manna that fed the Israelites in the wilderness, and Aaron's rod, which budded as a sign that he had been chosen by God for the priesthood. That is why, wherever the ark was, there was reverence and fear, because it symbolized the throne of the Lord among men. When David became king and established Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, a desire was born in his heart to bring the ark to the holy city. He wanted to centralize the worship of the Lord and acknowledge God's sovereignty over the nation. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Until that moment, the ark remained in Kiriath Jearim, in the house of Abinadab, where it had been for many years, since the Philistines had returned it after suffering great defeats for trying to keep it with them. 1 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. The arrival of the ark in Jerusalem was an event of great celebration. The people gathered with joy. There was music, songs, and rejoicing, because everyone knew that act meant honoring the reign of God over Israel. It was a festive procession, Levites, singers, and all the people walking together in worship. But one essential detail was ignored: the correct way of transporting the ark. In the instructions given in Exodus and Numbers, God had established that only the Levites from the family of Kohath could carry it, using poles resting on their shoulders, never on carts pulled by animals. David and the leaders, however, chose to place it on a new cart, led by Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 3. At first sight, it seemed like a correct attitude. After all, they chose a new cart. But even so, they were disobeying the command of God. This episode teaches us something important. When it comes to holy things, it is not enough to have good intentions. It is necessary to obey exactly what the Lord commands. On the way to Jerusalem, something unexpected happened. The oxen pulling the cart stumbled, and the ark looked as if it might fall. Quickly, Uzzah reached out his hand to hold it, wanting to protect something so sacred. But touching the ark was forbidden, because it represented the holiness of God himself. At that moment, the wrath of the Lord was revealed, and Uzzah died right there, in front of everyone. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. What before had been a celebration full of joy, music, and festivity was transformed into astonishment and fear. The people stood paralyzed in shock, and King David was also overcome by a deep dread. After that tragedy, David did not know what to do. The procession, which had begun with so much dancing and singing, ended in silence and reverence before the presence of God. A heavy question weighed in the heart of the king. How can I ever bring the ark of the Lord to myself? 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 9. He realized that he could not carry the ark in just any way, and that the presence of God must never be treated as something ordinary. For that reason, he decided to stop the march and not take the ark to Jerusalem at that time. Faced with this uncertainty, David needed to find a safe place for the ark to remain until he sought the right direction from the Lord. Then he decided to leave it in the house of Obed-Edom, a Levite, 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 10. Obed-Edom is identified as a Gittite, connected to the region of Gath, but at the same time he appears among the Levites who served in the temple as gatekeepers and worship leaders, 1 Chronicles chapter 15, verses 18 and 24. This means that Obed-Edom was not an ordinary man. He was part of a Levite family, responsible for the service of worship to God, and therefore he knew well the holiness of the ark. Still, think about the weight of this responsibility, to receive in his house the most sacred object of Israel, before which even a small mistake could cost a life, as had happened with Uzzah. The Ark of the Covenant was not just a box overlaid with gold. It represented the throne of the Lord on earth, the visible sign of the presence of God among his people. To have it in one's home did not merely mean guarding a precious object, but opening the doors for the holiness of God to dwell in that household. That required reverence, fear, and purity. Obed-Edom accepted this mission with courage. The Bible does not record any resistance or doubt on his part. On the contrary, he welcomed the ark into his house with respect and submission to the Lord. This gesture revealed his faith and trust. While others would have been terrified, he saw it as an honor. Meanwhile, David returned to Jerusalem. The king who had begun the journey with celebration and music was now downcast and reflective. He realized that he had carried the ark in the wrong way and understood that he needed to seek God's guidance with humility. Thus, the ark remained for a time in the house of Obed-Edom until the right moment came for it to be taken to Jerusalem in the proper way. And what many might have imagined as a time of fear and tension, after all, Uzzah had recently died for touching the ark, turned out to be the opposite. The Bible shows that instead of curse or judgment, the presence of God brought abundant blessings, transforming the life of Obed-Edom and all his family. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 11, it is written, "The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed him and all his household." Those 3 months were enough for everyone to notice the difference. The house that before was like any other was transformed into a place of prosperity, peace, and honor. Everything that belonged to Obed-Edom began to prosper. His possessions increased, his crops produced more, his herds multiplied, and his family enjoyed health. Wherever the presence of God was, there was life in abundance. The changes did not remain hidden. The whole community could see what was happening in the home of Obed-Edom. His house became a living testimony that the presence of the Lord transforms realities. His wife, his children, his servants, and everyone who lived with him experienced divine favor. And it was not only material prosperity, but a complete blessing that reached every area of life. While many were still afraid of the ark, Obed-Edom discovered in it the source of joy and the presence of God. This event also makes the contrast clear. The same sacred object that brought death to Uzzah because of irreverence now brought life and blessing to Obed-Edom because of his faith and respect. In this way, God showed Israel that his presence was not to be feared as a threat, but celebrated as a reason for joy by those who honored him. Soon, the house of Obed-Edom became known among all the people, not only because it had been the place where the ark rested temporarily, but as a symbol that the presence of God brings prosperity, protection, and transformation. Those 3 months revealed a truth that remains valid forever. When someone receives the presence of God with reverence, that presence becomes a source of blessing. That was what happened with Obed-Edom. His house prospered, his family was kept safe, and his story was marked as proof of the Lord's faithfulness. What happened in the house of Obed-Edom was not a simple detail of the ark's history, but a proof that God honors those who respect him and seek to live in obedience. The difference between fear and blessing was precisely in how the holiness of God was treated. While many distanced themselves in fear, Obed-Edom chose to welcome the ark with faith and reverence, and for that reason, he was greatly blessed. During the 3 months in which the Ark of the Covenant remained in his house, the news of the blessings of Obed-Edom spread throughout all Israel. His family prospered, His house was protected, and everyone could see that the presence of God had transformed that home. What once had been a reason for fear now became a clear sign of divine favor. When King David heard this news, he regained the courage he had lost after the death of Uzzah. The desire to bring the ark to Jerusalem returned even stronger in his heart, but this time accompanied by reverence and obedience to the commands of the Lord. He had learned that the presence of God could not be treated in just any way. The death of Uzzah had shown David a serious lesson. Good intentions do not replace obedience. In the first attempt, the ark had been transported on a new cart, pulled by oxen, as if it were only a common object. Now David knew that the holiness of the Lord required that everything be done exactly as God had determined since the time of Moses. The ark had to be carried by the Levites of the family of Kohath, using golden poles in the side rings upon their shoulders. Numbers chapter 4 verse 15, 1 Chronicles chapter 15 verse 15. David gathered the priests, the Levites, and all the people to explain why the first attempt to carry the ark had ended in tragedy. He acknowledged that the mistake had happened because they had not sought the Lord's guidance about how to transport it in the proper way. 1 Chronicles chapter 15 verse 13. This attitude shows how David had matured spiritually. It was not enough to desire the presence of God in Jerusalem. It was necessary to obey and honor the holiness of the Lord. This time, everything was done with reverence. The Levites purified themselves. The ark was placed on the poles as the law commanded, and the procession began in a spirit of fear and worship. When those who carried the ark had taken only 6 steps, David offered sacrifices of oxen and fattened rams. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 13. Every gesture showed care and respect, proving that this was no longer just a national celebration, but a solemn act of worship to the living God. Even so, joy was present. The people sang, the musicians played their instruments, and David, full of the Spirit, danced before the ark with all his might, wearing a linen ephod. 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 14. To some that seemed exaggerated, but to David it was the most sincere expression of gratitude and devotion. He did not care about criticism or about his image as king, because he knew that nothing was more important than celebrating the presence of God among Israel. The entrance of the ark into Jerusalem marked a historic moment. Until then it had passed through several places: Shiloh, Beth Shemesh, Kiriath Jearim, and more recently, the house of Obed-Edom. But now, as it was brought into the city that God had chosen as the capital of his people, the worship of the Lord would be centralized there, beginning a new chapter in the history of Israel. With the ark in Jerusalem, the reign of David gained not only political strength, but also spiritual authority. He recognized that the true king of Israel was the Lord, and the ark represented the throne of God among his people. This act brought unity to the nation and made Jerusalem the center of divine presence. The arrival of the ark in the city was not just a historical event, but also a moment of great spiritual value. It showed that obedience makes room for the presence of God, and that one cannot serve him in just any way. The difference between the first attempt and the second was precisely in respecting the Lord's instructions. David understood that it was not enough to desire the blessing, it was necessary to live in fear and reverence. By acting in this way, he opened the path for Jerusalem to become the central place of worship to the living God, preparing the stage for many future events in biblical history. The story of Obed-Edom also does not end with the 3 months in which he received the ark in his house. That experience was only the beginning of a lasting legacy. The man who had the courage to welcome into his home the most sacred object of Israel was so blessed that his life and the lives of his descendants were forever marked by faithfulness to God. After the ark was taken to Jerusalem, Obed-Edom did not return to an ordinary routine. Having hosted the presence of the Lord awakened in him and his family an even greater desire to serve. That is why, later, he and his descendants became gatekeepers and musicians in the temple, functions of great importance in the worship of Israel. In 1 Chronicles chapter 15, verse 18, Obed-Edom appears among the Levites chosen by David to play instruments and lead praise when the ark was brought to Jerusalem. This shows that he not only welcomed the ark into his home, but also continued to participate actively in public worship, helping the people to celebrate and honor the Lord. In 1 Chronicles chapter 26, verses 4 and 8, we find details about the descendants of Obed-Edom. Obed-Edom had sons, Shemaiah, Jehozabad, Joah, Sakar, Nethanel, Amiel, Issachar, and Pulathai, for God blessed him. Also to Shemaiah his son were born sons who became leaders of their father's house, for they were valiant and courageous men. This shows that the blessing of God in the life of Obed-Edom was not limited only to him or to material riches. The Lord raised from his family strong, brave, and faithful men who served as guardians of the temple. The role of gatekeeper was not something simple or without value. They cared for the entrances of the house of God, watching over the order and the holiness of the place of worship. It is remarkable to see how the faithfulness of one man spread to all his descendants. The Bible highlights that God blessed Obed-Edom, and that blessing multiplied in his sons and grandsons, making them respected leaders in the service of the Lord. From someone who only received the ark into his house, Obed-Edom became the patriarch of an entire family dedicated to the work of God. His story shows us that the presence of the Lord does not only transform one life, but can mark entire generations with purpose and honor. The life of Obed-Edom teaches that when we open not only our house but also our heart to the presence of God, extraordinary things happen. The blessing is not limited to the present moment, but extends like a river that reaches our children, our grandchildren, and even future generations. His journey proves that it does not matter how the story of a family begins, even if it is marked by difficulties or failures. When God enters it, everything is transformed, and what once seemed ordinary begins to carry the seal of eternity. Obed-Edom was not only the man who welcomed the Ark of the Covenant into his house for 3 months, he became an example of faithfulness and reverence to God. By opening the doors of his home to the presence of the Lord, he received much more than prosperity and protection. He built a legacy of service. His sons and grandsons continued on that path, serving as gatekeepers and musicians in the temple. This shows that his choice to honor God was not confined to his own life, but marked all his descendants, transforming them into a family dedicated to worship. The story of Obed-Edom teaches us that the true blessing is not in passing riches or in achievements that one day come to an end. There is something much greater and lasting, to be remembered as someone who chose to serve God with all his heart. His inheritance was not only of earthly goods, but of faith, something that cannot be lost with time nor taken away by men. When the Ark of the Covenant arrived at his house, Obed-Edom did not know what could happen. Many looked at the Ark with fear because it represented the holiness and the glory of the Lord. But instead of refusing, he welcomed the presence of God with trust and humility. That decision changed everything. The blessing of the Lord filled his life, reached his family, and left a testimony that crossed generations. The journey of Obed-Edom left a mark of obedience and faith that crossed generations. While many worried only about temporary achievements, he shows us that the greatest victory is to be recognized in heaven as someone faithful who valued the presence of God above all things. His story proves that when we place the Lord first, not only is our life transformed, but also our family and even the generations that will come after us. That is why, when we remember Obed-Edom, we understand that the true blessings are not found in riches, positions of honor, or earthly titles, because all of these are temporary. What truly remains is the testimony of a sincere and living faith. This is the most precious legacy that someone can leave, a life that points to God and continues to inspire others, even after death, to remain firm in faith. Thus it becomes clear that the greatest treasure we can leave is not in safes or properties, but in people reached and transformed by the example of our life with God. The name of Obed-Edom remains recorded in the Bible as a man who did not waste the opportunity to honor the Lord. This leads us to reflect, when we depart, what will remain of us? Only memories of temporary achievements or a legacy that leads others to the path of faith? And now I want to know, did you already know the story of Obed-Edom in the Bible? Write in the comments, share this message with more people, leave your like and subscribe to the channel to keep following videos like this. May God powerfully bless your life.